Okay, we are live.
We are.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Tonight, we are going to take a look at some more questions for Christians. Will we finally get hit with one that stumps us, or maybe even leads us down the road of deconversion that Joel so often talks about? So stick around to find out. Also, be sure to throw some of your questions in the chat. We love interacting with people and would love to see what kind of questions our listeners have. So, tonight, with me in our apologist squares, of course, I'm Caleb. Down here below me,
Joel Furchess.
over here this direction,
Clinton Wilcox.
and if everybody will point at him at the same time, right here, the special guest tonight, the one and only
Steve Schramm. Nice to be here.
Good to have you back with us, Steve. You're getting to the point where you're going to become a regular if you appear too many more times.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I don't know why you invite me on though. Every time we go about 3 hours, so.
And we got started late tonight, so
yes, we did.
It's going to be a real late night.
Thanks for the invite, guys. It's my pleasure entirely.
Yeah, and
we're glad to have you.
Yeah, and as you can tell, I'm getting in the festive spirit back there too.
Nice.
So,
Yeah, we really need a nerd on the show, but not just any nerd. A very specific kind of nerd.
Well, I mean, you have Nick and me, but I think Steve brings something a little unique to the table as a nerd.
Yeah, the whole Bible nerd thing seems to. I was surprised. Nobody really. I mean, there are 2 or 3 that have latched onto this now after I did it, but I guess I'm the OG, right? I'm the Bible nerd,
Right.
So I enjoy it. The Bible nerd, and you know what? I wear it loud and proud. I'm excited about it. I want that, and it just really aligns with that's what we all are, or we all should be. Really, is like I want to create ridiculously passionate Christians. We're rekindle the love for the Bible again. Like, let's, make the Bible great again,
Right. So what was your podcast called before? Because you had a different name for it, didn't you?
Yeah. So I'm a moving target. But I think
Okay.
I think I'm settled into this this kind of branding and everything for a while, because it seems to be working really well. But for a little while before this, it was just a Steve Schramm show, which nobody really cares about Steve Schramm, it turns out. So before that, it was
we care. We care.
Well, that I appreciate that, Joe. It means a lot. But nobody else did. So so before that, it was a show, believe it or not, entirely focused on young Earth creationism. It was called the Creation Academy, and so that was the entire show before, and I still hold that view, but I just I discovered so many other things that I loved and wanted to talk about too, and it just wasn't congruent to have a creation only show and then talk about all these other things. So I figure if I can get people nerdy and passionate about the Bible, then all the other fun stuff that I like comes along with it.
Oh, cool.
Ain't no nerd like a Bible nerd.
Right? That's my motto.
There ain't no party like an NST party.
Oh boy.
Sorry, any Flight of the Conchords fans in here?
I used to watch it all the time.
Yeah, it's a really funny show.
It's good, yeah.
And the nerdism is continuing to get deeper. That's kind of the point of the Mentionables. We bring a little bit of nerd to the table in a bunch of different ways, and we try and make this show as fun as possible without completely alienating people. But we get really, really close.
Yeah, if you want to have a nerd talk, we could talk about why Alex Kurtzman is like Hitler. I'm joking, but I don't like it. I don't like how he's treating modern Star Trek. So yeah, I'm not happy about Alex Kurtzman. But anyway,
Tell us how you really feel.
Wait a minute. So wait, I knew I recognized the name. So Alex Kurtzman is
well, yeah,
that guy.
Alex Kurtzman is a Hollywood screenwriter who has never really made a very good movie, but for some reason he keeps finding work. And so I apologize to any Alex Kurtzman fans out there, but I'm not very happy with him because he made the first 2 Transformers films, and the first one was decent, but the second one really started to go off the rails, and then it just got more and more terrible after that. He did what did he? Oh, he did the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, which were a terrible reboot. Although the second one, was kind of what I as a kid I had hoped The Secret of the Ooze would have been. So if I were still 10, I would probably love him. But no, he did really bad with those. He did one, I think, semi decent film called The Island, which had a very interesting premise that he didn't really do anything interesting with. And
I remember that one.
Yeah, and once the 2 lead characters escaped the facility, it just devolved into a Michael Bay action film. So now Alex Kurtzman, for some reason, has been given the green light to destroy Star Trek, and I'm not happy with the direction that he took the franchise.
So what is he writing? What Star Trek is he writing right now? Because I'm watching all of the new Star Trek. As
far as I know, Alex Kurtzman isn't actually writing any of the shows, but he's the producer of them, and kind of has like the creative control over the shows. But they do have actual writers coming on. But yeah, I've found the quality of the writing on the shows to be generally pretty bad. Especially when it comes to Star Trek Picard, they totally ruined not just Picard but the Next Generation, and they basically turned Jean-Luc Picard, who was a very intelligent man, a very quiet man who didn't care for children, but he was a brilliant diplomat, and they took him from someone who was the moral center of the Next Generation and turned him into a doormat. And it's just really, really, these are fiction shows. Like, I shouldn't get so worked up over fiction. But, I grew up with the Next Generation. The crew of the Enterprise were kind of like the family I didn't have. So, it's a fiction show, but it's one that I hold kind of dear to my heart. And so the fact that they've just ruined the franchise, and TNG in particular, really, has me irritated over it.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I completely agree with that assessment. I'm a pretty big Trekkie myself, and The Next Generation was my absolute favorite mainly because I thought my friend was the biggest nerd ever because he was into Star Trek, and then I watched a couple episodes of it and I was like, dude, this is awesome. And so I love The Next Generation, and I too was disappointed by the way they handled Picard.
So now, because I know we get listeners who might be nerds too. If you like Star Trek Discovery, if you like Star Trek Picard, more power to you. I wouldn't ever try and say you shouldn't like those shows. I'm just saying that as a hardcore Trekkie myself, who was actually looking forward to these new iterations of Star Trek, I was very, very disappointed in them. And I think I could present a case that they're objectively bad Star Trek shows. I think Discovery would be a decent sci-fi show if it wasn't pretending to be Star Trek. I would say it'd actually be a decent, or maybe even a pretty good sci-fi show if it wasn't trying to be Star Trek. So I don't want I don't want to offend anybody out there. If you like the shows, more power to you. But those are my personal views as someone who grew up with the Next Generation.
Okay. Last question.
Every recorded Star Trek show.
Last question on this, and then I guess we could let Caleb take the discussion somewhere productive.
These monologues on Star Trek are really exciting for those of us who have zero interest in Star Trek.
I'm terribly sorry. You could go find another conversation. But I am curious, Clinton, about your assessment of the Orville. I'm assuming you've watched the Orville, which is basically has a lot of the same, directors and producers of the Next Generation, and fits that genre.
I actually really like the Orville. The Orville was the Star Trek we should have got from Discovery. So I'm definitely in the Orville good, Discovery bad camp. Because you can really now. I've never really been a fan of what's his name? The guy who did the Orville. The guy,
Seth MacFarlane.
Seth MacFarlane. I've never really been a fan of his style of humor. I can't really stand Family Guy, but the Orville actually turned out to be really good. You could really tell that Seth MacFarlane loves Star Trek and wanted to create a show that lived up to Star Trek, even though he couldn't make an actual Star Trek show. Plus, they have actual writers that wrote for the show. Coming on to write for the Orville, and they've actually had some very interesting episodes. And you could even kind of tell that it looks like Seth MacFarlane, he's obviously very liberal, but I actually found some of the philosophical discussions on the show to actually be very interesting.
Yeah.
Just like, because Star Trek has always been fairly progressive. So it's not the progressive angle it's not the progressive angle that I would denigrate of the old shows, even though I don't agree with it. I always found the discussions interesting, even if I didn't ultimately agree with it. But some I did. They had shows about suicide, which I thought presented a good case against killing yourself if you're disabled, things like that. They had some anti-abortion shows. Geordie LaForge was told when they encountered a perfect society that he would have been aborted because of his disability before he was born. So of course, there's the classic episode, The Measure of a Man, in which they investigated whether or not Data was a person. Now, I don't believe Data is a person, so I didn't agree with the ultimate conclusion of the episode, but I found the journey and the discussion to be really interesting. And I think the Orville has kind of taken that spirit and done a fairly decent job with it. And season one, kind of got off to a rocky start, but season two, especially near the end, got really good. And I'm looking forward to see what they're going to do in season 3. Although unfortunately, it's already been canceled, so season 3 is going to be its last. But yeah.
Well,
how long is this conversation going to go?
I'm going to give you I'm going to give you a really awesome segue. Okay, so the actress who is the commander in the Orville is also, or at least was, one of the stars of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And so, since they're superheroes and we're superheroes, we can now transition back to the Mentionables.
Okay, well, in that case, I won't add an interesting tidbit to that.
I need my 45 minutes to talk about The Mandalorian. Do I get my 45 minutes for that now?
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so we'll just have to listen to you talk about it.
That would be a fun segment, though, if we picked up a sci-fi show such as Black Mirror and watched episodes for the philosophical content.
Well, we did something like that with movies at one point. So yeah, science fiction, presents a lot of good opportunities for philosophical discussion and even theological discussion. So
yeah, the weirdest thing about this last section we just did here, it's probably going to be our most highly viewed segment in all our videos, just across the board. So
we'll need to start having a Star Trek discussion first thing on our Mentionables podcast.
It's interesting because I was recently reading some science fiction, and it was a short story, and it was basically kind of a science fiction take on the sirens from the Odyssey. And so basically it's this intergalactic travel, so they kind of take turns in stasis for a couple of years, and then they'll wake up and the other crew will go to stasis so that they can traverse these very long. Yeah. Anyway, so this guy wakes up from stasis and his ship is crashed on this planet and all the crew is gone. And then he looks out and all of the ships from the fleet are also crashed on the planet. And when he goes to sleep, he has these dreams about these beautiful women that are over the ridge on the horizon that are just calling to him. And so he's like, well, that can't possibly be true. And anyway, the whole point was at some point he comes to the conclusion that there must, in fact, be something beyond the ridge. And in my mind, I'm like, but what's the epistemology you use to come to that conclusion? Dreams? Yeah. Or is it the fact that the entire crew is missing and, they've all gone beyond that ridge?
What's the book called?
It's not a book. It's a short story. Okay. I don't remember the name of it.
Sounds like an interesting.
Yeah, I thought of rewriting the story of the sirens and make it a discussion among the crew about ontology and epistemology. I thought it would
Right
be
on.
really interesting to
Well, you've
make.
already rewritten my awesome segue, so
Right.
just keep on.
All right. So before diving into our questions for the night and digging into that a little bit, Joel, did you prepare our lovely segment for tonight, or are we doing the meme thing again?
I did not prepare games. I do have the book in front of me. I was thinking that if we wanted to do that, you guys could just give me a number between 1 and 50, and I could flip to that page and read it, and then we could discuss it. I have not yet read this book.
Perfect. I think that sounds like a good plan. We'll kind of take this show where it goes. If listeners
Yep.
drop in questions, then we'll kind of take it and move that way. But in the meantime, I think that will be a good start. Who's the book
Yeah.
by? Can you give us a little background on that?
So this is a book titled 50 Simple Questions for Every Christian, written by Guy Harrison, or Guy P. Harrison, as the title says. I know nothing about Guy P. Harrison, except that he got a very glowing review by the prologue to the book was written by,
Richard Carrier.
no, it's that guy, the scientist that's very popular, a science popularizer, and he's an astronomer.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that time. Michael KQ or the white haired guy.
Yeah.
No, I'd take it back.
I actually kind of like him. He doesn't say a lot of things that I agree with all the time, but I think.
Okay, so according to the back of the book, Guy P. Harrison is an award-winning journalist and author of 50 popular beliefs that people think are true, 50 reasons people give for believing in God, and Race and Reality, what everyone should know about our biological diversity. And I apologize for whatever reason I thought that Neil deGrasse Tyson had written the prologue, but I don't see a prologue. It's been endorsed by Reverend Barry Lynn, Phil Zuckerman, Peter Boghossian, Cameron Smith,
Reverend.
Jake Farwalton, and Nick Wynn.
I think I recognize one of those names.
Peter Boghossian.
You probably know Peter Boghossian.
Yeah, Peter Boghossian. He was the name I recognized. And actually, I was going to say, if one of our listeners want to drop in a number, we could do listener requests for the number that we tackle also.
Sure.
Sounds great. We'll see if anybody drops anything in there. I think our whole Star Trek segment may have scared off any potential viewers we had. Not to point fingers or anything, but
So yeah,
just trying to cut down the time. The time, doing my part.
Yeah. Now each of these questions has like 5 pages of content written, underlying the question. So given the nature of the show, I'll probably just need to read the question.
Yeah, I would say maybe you just read the question and then we can just answer the question.
Sure.
How we would answer it without.
Right. And I'll skim the content as we're answering to see if there's any interesting points he brings up.
Okay.
sounds good. If only I had a random number generator,
Well, I could actually have Siri roll a 50-sided die.
We're not nerds on here at all.
Do it.
All
right. I think you mean you're going to roll a 1d50.
Well, I'm going to have Siri roll it. Okay. Hey Siri, roll a 50-sided die. Oh, her voice didn't come up, but she got the number 3.
Number 3. Okay, number 3 is going to need some explanation here. So the question is it rude to ask? It says, many think it is impossible to talk about religion in any meaningful way in most settings. Strangely, this unwritten prohibition is promoted most vigorously by people who talk about religion in virtually every setting. So, is it rude to ask about religion?
No, I don't think so.
I'm a little befuddled at the and this is wait, a little more context. The title of the book is 50 questions to ask Christians. Is that what the
50, 50 simple questions for every Christian. The implication, I think, being these are simple questions that, in fact, Christians don't have good answers to. I'm skimming underneath the questions, and the complaint here appears to be that whereas Christians will talk about the religion constantly in any setting, they'll also make the claim that, hey, you can't ask about religion. That's rude. It's rude to question my religion. So he's saying, this is a paradox or an inconsistency in Christians because they want to talk about religion, but they don't want to be asked about religion.
Well, let me give just a real quick couple thoughts. I mean, one thing is I don't necessarily know that I could answer the question as asked because I can't identify a single Christian in my time of being a Christian that I've known who would have characterized it that way, that it was rude to ask about their faith. Now, maybe that was just my naivety or whatever, but I've never run into a Christian who would have thought, yeah, it's rude for you to ask me about that. Why? I mean, like I've always been in very evangelistic contexts. And so whether or not the folks that I grew up with or around or whatever would have had necessarily good reasons for their faith is a different question. But I don't know anybody who would have said it was rude to ask. They would have loved to ask so that they could pull out their tract and start witnessing. That's just the kind of Christians I grew up around. I will say that in general, and this goes to a little bit of something we were talking about before we went live, in general, there is a stigma around the idea of asking, at least within Christian circles, about faith, about, like it's kind of like taboo. Nobody really talks about how it's not welcome, but there's just this kind of assumption that you're not allowed to ask the pastor questions. You're not allowed to have doubts about your faith. You guys know the idea that I'm getting at there. And so in that sense, for certain, we need to be, I think we would want to say that we need to be able to ask those questions and open up and deal with challenging things and difficult things and not just shy away from them.
So what I'm getting out of this is that here is an atheist, and he's written a book about asking questions about Christians, and presumably these are challenging questions that are meant to poke holes in Christian faith. And so he's responding, I believe, here to this idea that, if Christians want to talk about Christianity, they want to do so on their terms. But as soon as an atheist starts asking 50 questions that might be deflating of Christianity, they get offended and say, how dare you question my beliefs? And so, it appears to be kind of the smokescreen that he believes Christians are throwing up to prevent having to answer tough questions. It's rude to ask those questions.
Yeah, I would say this is a caricature of Christians because like Steve, I don't know any Christians who would say you can't question my faith or you can't try and witness to me because then again I run in.
But let me interrupt you
apologetic
just a
circles,
second
but-
there. Steve, could you mute your mic while you're not talking, bud?
Sorry.
A lot of interference going on in the background. All right,
Okay.
continue, please.
Yeah, so this is just really a caricature of Christianity because, like Steve, I don't know any Christians who would say, no, you can't question my faith or you can't witness to me. I mean, I know Christians who, and I've done this myself, but I know other Christians who actually will invite Mormon missionaries to their house or Jehovah's Witnesses to have these discussions because obviously
not Caleb though, because he's kind of a wuss when it comes to that.
Because we want to evangelize. We believe that if someone isn't saved, they're going to hell. So we want to evangelize those people. So why wouldn't a Christian want you to come and question us? In fact, I get a lot of anxiety when I think about talking to strangers. I wish more people would come up to me and try to witness to me so I could have these discussions with them.
All right. Well, what about atheists that are kind of hitting you with questions that are obviously, what do you call it, combative in nature?
Well, yeah. I mean, if someone's being combative, then I might, I'll try and diffuse the situation. But if they're just going to continue to be combative, then yeah, I'm not going to continue to talk to them because the discussion is not going to be productive. But if an atheist comes to me, if an atheist knows I'm a Christian, comes to me and says, "Hey, look, I don't know why an atheist would do this, but if he comes up and says, "Hey, there's no God. I think why do you believe in God?" Then we can have that discussion if he's being sincere about it. But if he's just being combative, then yeah, just in the interest of not wanting to have an unproductive conversation, I'm just going to say, no, sorry, I'm not going to talk about this right now. That's not a case of not wanting anyone to ask me about it.
I think we could agree, though, that the prudent Christian would want to or should want to defuse such a situation using, how Greg Kokel talks about dealing with steamrollers, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
And not just calling the atheist rude because, but literally saying like, no, you're rude and here's why. Like, so it would be helpful if more Christians understood those tactics.
Sure, but even Greg Kokel in his book Tactics says there does come a time when you just have to leave the conversation because so you can diffuse a steamroller, but some people are not there to just are not there to have a productive conversation. They just want to tell you you're wrong, and so he would just say just listen patiently, and then when he's done, just excuse yourself from the conversation. So even then, there comes a time, obviously a lot of people, especially atheists, can have a lot of these hangups and might be combative about it, and you want to try and diffuse them because you want them to come to a saving knowledge of Christ. But there also comes a time when it's just there's no real productivity to be had in the conversation.
Okay, we want to hit another one, or Caleb, did you have something? I didn't hear you talking about this at all.
Yeah. I was just going to dive in and say that I kind of agree with Clinton there. I think that, there's quite a few Christians who would love to sit down and have a conversation. But I also understand where the author is coming from because, in general, a lot of the Christians you encounter, because we haven't been good at preparing over the last decade in particular, aren't prepared to have that kind of conversation. So when it comes to it, it turns into a question or a back and forth battle versus an actual discussion that somebody wants to have, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, you believe evolution? Oh, you believe in the Big Bang? Oh, well, what banged it? And it's these aggressive. Now that's a good joke, but it's not a good actual question to hit somebody with like that. So, I think people's experience, particularly for many of the atheists I've talked to, has been very much that it's a very aggressive conversation when it starts, and if they even mention it. And so I think people need to learn how to have gentler, kinder conversations that encourage dialogue and thought, because otherwise, we're just going to end up doing the same thing with people who believe differently than us than, political parties have done to completely ostracize the other side.
Yeah, so I think the default defense in this day and age, when somebody challenges your particular ideals or beliefs, is to sort of jump straight to that's offensive, how dare you question my ideas, etc., rather than to kind of engage. And honestly, the engagement when it occurs tends to be combative and, without a great deal of substance behind it. So I could see that. And it's interesting because I was mentioning prior to the show reading that I've been doing. I was reading I've been recently reading stories of a particular genre from the late 19th, early 20th century, which involve a lot of people sitting around dinners or in drawing rooms or things like that, and having these discussions in which they take a very particular perspective and then they enjoy hashing it out. So the one I was reading today had a theological conversation, and the guy clearly didn't have any sympathies to theology, but they were having the conversation and adopting the different perspectives. And I think that was more usual in that time period. because people were more open to such discussions and understood that different people have different perspectives. And so there was this sort of mutual respect of, yeah, you're okay having your perspective. You let me have my perspective. There's less of that nowadays, I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. Ready to move on to a different one?
I think.
All right. Well, let me just throw a dart here. All right. Number 34. What is the problem with evolution?
Man, we're really going to land on that one. That's just our lucky day.
Sorry.
Oh, me.
I think-
Oh, me. What is the problem? with evolution?
Okay,
I
just to
think that we
repeat
can
that
each-
because you were breaking up a little. Is the question, what is the
problem with evolution?
Is there any kind of statement of
what is the
context?
problem with evolution?
I'm starting to look for it now. All right. What is the problem? Well, that's on 219. Okay. I'm getting there. Thank you for your patience. All right. During a visit to East Africa, I enjoyed a moment of solitude by allowing my imagination to run free. Far from the cities and close to the wild earth that was once all we knew, I
I'm
see
going to switch
prehistoric
internet
humans.
connections. I may disappear.
Okay. Cooking meat over fire, one cracks open a bone with a stone hand axe. They chatter back and forth, making a noise I don't understand. I only know that it's definitely language. It fills the evening air. Like beautiful music in a vast concert hall, based on their low foreheads, heavy eyebrow ridges, and stone tools, my guess is that they are Homo erectus. It's maybe 500,000 years or so before my time. They're obviously people, but not quite anatomically modern. A mother tussles with her energetic baby. He is a handful, but she manages to keep him within arm's reach without too much effort. I'm not sure, but I think I heard the mother giggle. The older child picks up a stone tool. She smashes small sticks. Okay, let me see if I can jump ahead. All right. The evidence
It's a
that has been
long
amassed.
question introduction.
Well, like I said, these are, there's about 5 pages.
Well, I'll just jump in here real quick while you're looking a little further.
Okay, essentially, he says there's a lot of evidence for evolution, and then he gives 5 bad reasons that Christians reject evolution. I can read those if you like.
Am I still
hit us
here?
with bad reasons. You
Yeah,
are
we can hear
still
you,
there.
Steve.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, reason number 1 that's bad. Evolution is just a theory.
Oh, can I guess one?
Sure.
If evolution is true, why are there still monkeys?
No, there's only 5 here, so
Oh, okay. Well, I guess one that didn't make the list, I guess.
yeah. These are reasons,
I
not
did
argument.
I did a in other words, for somebody to say that would be a bad objection to evolution. That's his point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I did a podcast episode on that. I'm a Christian and I agree. It's wrong to say evolution is just a theory. Now, of course, we could go the answers in Genesis route and just say it's not even a theory, but I'm not going to go there. People do they misunderstand what it is to be a science, what it is for a scientific theory. They misunderstand what that definition is, for sure enough. So yeah, agreed.
All right, so I think we get the idea here that, the idea being that he thinks that evolution is very defensible and that Christians are very foolish to reject it, and this sort of decredits Christianity.
Yeah. So, what is the problem with evolution? Well, nothing if it's true. So that's the question: is it true? Because evolution is compatible with Christianity. So if you believe in evolution, you'll think certain parts of Scripture are allegorical instead of literal history. But yeah, there's nothing incompatible between Christianity and evolution.
I mean, evolution as an explanation for practically everything about human beings, including, say, our conscience and self-awareness, personal value, things that we tend to, value, especially as Christians. At most, that just explains a process by which those things were cemented or came to be. And I mean, let's say you go back to the Genesis creation narrative. In the Genesis creation narrative, you have a period at which nothing existed, followed by a series of stages, after which everything existed. So whether or not you're going by Genesis or by, the consensus science, you're talking about a series of stages that brings us to where we are now. And so biblically, they don't really have a problem with that. The idea that things were brought to be over a series of stages or a process. If the Bible had said God blinked, like, I Dream of Jeannie, and then everything was exactly as it is now, last Thursdayism or whatever they call that, then I could see that being somewhat problematic in terms of evolution. But I don't think that we can really say that if we were to evidence that everything came to be through a series of stages or a process, that this somehow discredits Christianity. At most, it discredits the Bible if you take the Genesis story to be a literal historical description of an event. But if that were to be shot down, it does not shoot down Christianity.
Yeah, I'll say, like, for one thing, it's definitely a fair question. Because for such a long time, I mean, probably decades, so many people just equated apologetics with being just anti-evolutionism, basically. And in fact, that was one of the whole reasons I got into ministry, which is something interesting. If the one person that does care who Steve Schramm is wants to know this, when I started my podcast, that was entirely about the subject of creation. The reason why I did is because I was so tired of the fact that all of the other creation material that was out there was just evolution bashing, instead of taking what we believe, or me and my fellow young age creationists, what we believe the Bible to be teaching, and then building models that make sense of the world around us from that perspective. So I started my podcast for the sole purpose of highlighting the people who were doing that research. And I'm certainly not going to attribute it to my podcast. But from the time that I started that podcast to now, there has been a huge resurgence of creation scientists, which that term is a little loaded, but scientists who affirm young age creation, who aren't like the old guard of anti-evolutionism, who actually do care. And that's why they don't make as much noise. And that's why everybody online still dishes Ken Ham and Kent Hovind, because those are the only two guys still leading the charge of every word out of our mouth has to be anti-evolutionism. Most informed creationists today aren't making noise because they're busy in the lab doing research. And I can point to their papers and show you their stuff. And anyway, they're not screaming about it on Facebook. Anyway, so that's one thing. It's a fair question. Another thing too is, it's kind of like Clinton said, if it's true, then there's nothing wrong with it. Here's the thing, is from a biblical perspective, right? If you are somebody who is convinced that the text teaches a particular thing, then you're going to have problems with evolution. So the answer to the question, what's the problem with evolution? Well, the problem from a Bible believer's standpoint is, if there is something biblical here that obviously contradicts what we see coming out of evolutionary science, then there is some sort of problem, and we have to work that out. Either our interpretation of the Bible is wrong, or our interpretation of the science is wrong. And then, of course, the other main factor there is the science actually as cemented or as sure as they say it is? And I can just point to many resources that contend their claims, who I have just as much reason to trust as I do any other scientist. So it's disputed. That's what's a potential problem with it.
Yeah. So Steve,
Yes.
just out of curiosity, what do you think of Answers in Genesis?
Oh, Caleb's gonna like this, right? Just Caleb and I met kind of under this context.
Oh.
So I go to the Creation Museum just as much as any other fundamentalist background family will. I do. I like the Creation Museum. I like the Ark Encounter. I don't agree with everything that they have in there. I will say that a lot of the a lot of the exhibits and stuff that you find in there, the science that backs them was done by people who you've never heard of, because they're not on the bashing, evolution bashing kind of thing. I think that Ken Ham is somebody who loves the Lord. I think he's got a tremendous zeal for his faith, and I think that he has good intentions. I also think he uses inflammatory language very unnecessarily. I think that they, as a whole, are not open to dialogue as much as I would like them to be. I also think I'll come in here with a little bit of the other way. I also think they're a little bit misunderstood sometimes. There are scenarios, and I've had personal conversations with some of their scientists who are really, really great people, and they will make statements in some of their works like, the other guys just aren't reading our stuff. And I hear people who take issue with that. But the reality is that that's true in my conversations with people. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people, old earth creationists, evolutionary creationists, with people who've taken exception with their work, but they've admitted to me that they won't read it because they don't think it's legitimate. And so you can't have your cake and eat it too. I mean, you have to actually interact with the work if you're going to say that they're just spewing malarkey to get into my Biden there. If they're spewing malarkey, if that's really what they're doing, then go in there and actually interact with the ideas instead of just spewing malarkey the other direction towards them on Facebook. So I do think they're misunderstood, but I think their approach is unhelpful. And I want to see more people doing what we call model building a positive model of creation. If you're so convinced that this is the interpretation of the Bible that we should have, okay, great. Now go out and let's do some work that shows that we can believe it as we look at the world around us. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, whenever I hear discussions about creation and evolution, a quote from G.K. Chesterton always comes to mind. I can't recreate the quote exactly, so I'm just paraphrasing, but essentially, it's Christians, not atheists, who are the true free thinkers. Atheists have to believe certain things. Like atheists can't give any ground on the evolution discussion because to them, that's really, there are other theories like, aliens seeded the planet or something like that. But this is really the only credible theory that they have as to how human beings came about. But Christians, because we believe in God and we hold the scriptures to be the inspired word of God, we're free to accept evolution, but we're also free to reject evolution. Atheists are not free, for the most part, to reject evolutionary theory. And so, Christians, not atheists, are the true free thinkers because we're allowed to follow the evidence where it leads. We're not, we're not set into certain, there are certain fundamental doctrines of Christianity, but for the most part, we're not really set in any, any. I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but there are a number of things that we can actually come to different disagreements on and still be believers. So, Christians are a lot more free to disagree than atheists are.
Sure. And I will go ahead and bring up one thing here while we're going at it that kind of like, I don't know, it bothers me, and maybe it only bothers me because I'm so entrenched in the young age creationist world. But like, there are a lot of popularizers, apologists who take the old earth view, who I feel like they're just way too willing to punt. In other words, where it's like, as long as we believe, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, like we're good. If I have this one view of how the Bible says it, but it turns out that science has definitively answered this the other way, then I will have to go back and change my interpretation of scripture. And I have to just admit that troubles me a little bit. Like I mean, I just can't, I just have trouble parsing it, where it's like, how do you decide on what those things are that are so strong and so powerful that they will overturn I mean, like the party of science now I'm getting political, but I don't mean to get political, but literally the party of science in America today, as they self-proclaim themselves, is the most anti-scientific thing that I have ever seen in my life on multiple counts. And so, I do think that we just need to be careful where if we really do come to odds between what science really seems to say right here and what the Bible really seems to say right here, I really have run into a lot of apologists who seem to think it's just much more likely that we would be wrong about our interpretation of the text than that we would be wrong about the interpretation of the science. And I don't personally understand that position. Nobody's ever been able to tell me why it's obvious that we should go with the science in this case. I'll just go ahead and get controversial. One of the most recent context of this that has come up is William Lane Craig. And I love, Dr. Craig. He's got to be one of my favorites. I listen to him, probably 3 or 4 times a week. I used to listen to him every day. And
Who's
on
that
a recent, again?
Yeah,
you probably never heard of him. He's kind of a nobody. But on this, I was actually interested in the way that he said it. It was a recent interview. When I say recent, it's been a couple months now that he did on Capturing Christianity with Cameron. And somebody asked him the question fairly directly, because he had just announced all the kind of findings about his historical Adam, and he's willing to place Adam in the 700,000 to 800,000 year range. Some pretty controversial stuff. And the question was fairly directly asked to him, like, well, what, how, like, can you be objective about like how do you deal with that when it's like, because he's publicly said that he thinks that the only 2 viable interpretations of Genesis based on his study are this thing he's coined as mytho-history, or the young age creationist view. And his point was, if the young age creationist view is true, then we're just hopeless in terms of being able to understand the beginning as the way that the Bible puts it, without totally punting to there being error in the text or something. He feels that strongly about it. And so when asked that question, he just kind of said, I got to admit, I'm kind of motivated to want the mytho-historical view to be true, because then it doesn't conflict with what I really believe to be true over here on the science. And I appreciated his honesty in that answer, but that just is something, if I'm just airing my grievances, that I'm just like, how do you decide that, that we're more likely to be wrong about the text than we are to be wrong about the science? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, because I do work in bioethics, and this is actually something that a lot of people, even in the pro-life field, tend to overstate. And I've done it in the past too. It's as I study more science and more philosophy, I come to realize that science is not really the be-all end-all of human knowledge. There's some reliability to it, because we have actual empirical evidence, things we can actually point to and say that is evidence for this scientific point of view. But the thing is that science is never really settled on anything. We used to hold to a Newtonian view of the universe, and now we hold to an Einsteinian view. And it may come, and some physicists in 100 years may come along and change the scientific paradigm of the universe again. So even things like the universe having a beginning in time, well, there could be some scientific discovery 50 years from now that controverts that. So the science has never really said anything. So, while we can say, for example, there are certain empirical points of evidence that I can point to from my point of view, that's not necessarily the end of the matter. So yeah, that's something I've just come to learn as a
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's a good observation.
I'm always, whenever I hear a atheist adopt a position and then argue that position, I tag on the line, therefore God doesn't exist, to see if it makes sense. Is their argument consistent with the conclusion that God doesn't exist? And I don't see that evolution can end, making a support of evolution can end with the phrase, therefore God doesn't exist. It doesn't seem to me as an argument against God more than an argument against a particular characteristic or characterization of Scripture. And if you were to chop off the first part of Genesis and then propose the theory of evolution, I wonder if any Christian would find it problematic at all. And perhaps you're welcome to make that argument that even without the book of Genesis, that evolution somehow cuts against the existence of God, but I don't think it does. I think it targets a very specific subset of Christian, theology or Christian beliefs. So at any rate, yeah, and
I do think that's true. I do think that's true. Although I would say that, and we're not going to go down this rabbit hole. At least I'm not. But I think you could. You might have some people saying that even without the book of Genesis, you have questions that arise about the nature of humanity, what it means to be, truly human, and
Sure.
Abortion and eugenics and all that stuff. So you still have a problem, but I see totally what you're saying, and I agree.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's take the book of Genesis, for instance. Here you have an instance in which the human being, who is created in God's image, more or less, is created out of clay from the earth. All right. So you have a creature that is, significant among the other creatures on the earth, who is created out of non-biological material and turned into a biological entity. And then it says that
wasn't Wonder Woman made out of clay from the earth?
I don't know.
Okay, sorry, that's a little
Probably. Yeah. And then, it says that God breathed life into it, which we take to be some kind of reference to the soul, or, that the soulish nature of human beings that separates them from, biological organisms without that soulish nature directly from God. And again, I mean, it could almost, in the context of the story, even, it could almost be said to be, more of a picture representation of the soulishness of human beings rather than an illustration of God physically coming down and putting his mouth over this clay object and breathing into the clay object. Probably even creationists don't take it to mean that. It was, the creation was imbued with a soul, which is something that could happen through any kind of process. Doesn't require a golem, if you will, to be created. So there you go. Either way, evolution and, as a reverse of what I was saying about the therefore God does not exist tag on the end of an argument, you could equally ask, given God, what do we make of evolution? What do we make of suffering? Of these various arguments, and you could say, if we presuppose God and then look at the problem, if it is a problem, then we can see how this problem can be compatible with God if we understand God by nature of this process. So, given God, what do we make of evolution? Is it possible to have a being, a person, who designs things through the process of evolution? It's possible. This does not take away from this being a being. It's a particular understanding of how this being operates.
And I have to say I like that, Joel, because that's the approach I try to practically use in having conversations with people. Either one, we try and set the issue of age of the earth and mechanism for creation aside until at a later time where we can have that conversation when we have a lot more common ground, or I try to be well equipped enough that I could argue and have a discussion from any one of those viewpoints. So if somebody has evolution as a barrier to understanding and coming to the gospel, then I'm open to having a conversation with them as a what's the word I'm looking for now? I've just lost it.
Icebreaker?
As a progressive creationist. So I'm willing to accept the premise of evolution for our discussion. And I would like to talk about, the evidence even within evolution of creation. Convergent evolution, for example, is a really interesting phenomenon where we see same and very similar species develop from what would be considered completely different evolutionary chains. So anyway, that kind of conversation is the kind of one I would have with someone who's, bringing up that kind of issue. Let's set it aside and let's look at it from that perspective as to what kind of evidence there is for God.
I think it's a bit of a problem in that many Christians will read a couple of Ken Ham books, or get regular subscriptions from Answers in Genesis, or go see the Ark Encounter or whatnot, and come away, or listen to Ray Comfort, for instance, and come away with this idea that they can then go to an evolutionary biologist and stand in front of them and tell them why they're wrong. And I can tell you from study that that's not going to happen. You put anybody in front of an evolutionary biologist that is not themselves a biologist, well studied, and they're not going to be able to shoot that down. And this is one of the things that I've found as a step towards deconversion in a lot of people, unfortunately, is this idea that either creationism or atheism, those are your choices. And when their creationism is sort of debunked by an evolutionary biologist in college, then suddenly their faith gets pretty shaky. And so it is my resolution as an apologist to not debate somebody on something who is an expert in that thing, and I'm not. I am not a biology expert whatsoever, nor am I a geologist. I'd hesitate to call myself an expert, but I'm well informed in astronomy and astrophysics, those kinds of things. And that is one challenge I have with the idea of a young Earth, is that it is very evident to me that the universe itself is not young. So.
Yeah, I would be actually interested in investigating how the young Earth creationist scientists deal with things like the age of the universe. I actually do have a book. I have a book by, I think, 50 scientists in different fields who got degrees from reputable universities, who all talk about their belief that their belief in a young Earth. And I only remember two explanations. One, when I was a young Earth creationist, this was the one I found more plausible, was that the universe was created with the appearance of age. That seemed to me the most plausible one. God created the stars with the light already in transit, and just like he created Adam and Eve as full-blown adults, he could have created the universe with the appearance of age. And I know some theologians would say that basically all miracles have the appearance of age. For example, when Jesus turned water into wine, well, Jesus turned the water into wine right there on the spot, but wine, of course, has to be aged over time in order to become wine. So, most, if not all, miracles have the appearance of age. So I found that one to be the more plausible one. The other one was a scientific explanation, which may be plausible. I'm not a scientist, so it may be the reason I didn't find it very convincing was because I'm not a scientist. But he talked about something like how there's a black hole, I believe, at the center of either of our galaxy or of the universe. And so because of relative time dilation, the closer to the black hole you get, I think the slower time is, or the faster time is, something like that. And so it had something to do with that time here went a lot faster, I think, than near the center of the universe. It was a really weird, like convoluted scientific explanation, and some of it I found plausible because I understand the science of some of it, but I wasn't.
If I could enlighten you just a bit,
okay, sure.
You can, it is generally agreed upon that the universe is expanding, right? And the universe is not infinite. The space into which it's expanding could theoretically be infinite, but the universe itself is not. And so if you go to the edge of the universe, like the edge of the expansion, you will find, and this is a fact that nobody disputes, that the things at the edge, the galaxies and stars and so forth, are going to have experienced much more age in time than we do where we're sitting. So as things expand away at the speed of light, they will age rapidly from their perspective. It's all relative. But those things which are traveling at the speed of light will tend to experience time in a different way than the things that are traveling at a slower rate. This was,
that sounds like it was probably what he was explaining.
Okay, so the theory that you're probably talking about was not a black hole theory, it was a white hole theory. And the white hole theory is that the universe was created in sort of the reverse process of a black hole, which attracts all things with maximum gravity. The white hole would repel all things with maximum gravity, so that everything expanded from that point. And the Earth, being close to the center of that point of expansion, has experienced time at a much slower rate than those things at the edge of the expansion. So depending on where you go in the universe could be very old or very young based on the rate of expansion. And so I believe that's the theory you're probably talking about. It's one that I read.
That could be it. Actually, now that you explain it like that, it actually sounds a lot more interesting than I was giving it. Credit for. Maybe I need to go back and reread.
I believe the movie Interstellar kind of plays around with that idea a bit.
Yeah, I saw Interstellar. I really enjoyed Interstellar until it became just a generic love conquers all movie. But for like the first three quarters, where it was more of a scientific exploration of the difference in time, I actually found most of that pretty interesting. So it was once he like went to the 4-dimensional tesseract, I started to check out.
Yeah. So everything I just explained is true. The more rapidly you expand, and I don't think any astrophysicist would argue that there are places in the universe which have experienced time in a different way than we have. So there are areas of the universe that are much older based on the speed of expansion. But astrophysicists would not argue that there are also areas of the universe that are 10,000 years old or less. I think that they wouldn't go that far. It's just this particular theorist who was working for a young Earth perspective was using that as an explanation for why creation could have been much younger in our area.
So a couple things. So that's Russ Humphrey's white hole cosmology. Probably for 10, 15 years, that was the reigning theory of astronomy and of distant starlight, of the distant starlight issue from a young age creationist perspective. In recent days, though, so it's been improved upon probably 3 times by that guy. And then another time it was improved upon by a couple other guys. And the one's Australian, his name is escaping me, but he actually created formulated a newer version of it back in like 2006. And he has since come to drop his own model and his own version of that model in favor of the model that I currently find to be the most believable, which is very new. I did a 2-part podcast series on it a year or 2 ago, and it's called the creation time coordinates. It's very new. It's based on the work of Dr. Jason Lyle. I'm sure y'all are a little bit familiar with Lyle. He's one of the more popular voices. He came up with a position he calls the anisotropic synchrony convention, which is basically just trading on the idea that the speed of light, you can only calculate it, one way. But it itself is it sounds like when you're just looking at it, it sounds pretty arbitrary. It's it sounds really arbitrary, and to the point that most people just like, they kind of, okay, yeah, sure, like that might work. But a lot of people kind of rejected it and just said, this might be just kind of wishful thinking. But there's this creation time coordinates theory is really interesting. I linked the paper up in our little private chat. I don't know, for interested parties, Caleb, I don't know if you want to put that on that in the YouTube link or whatever, but this is three physicists, and one of them might be an engineer. Really good guys. I've spoken to one of them. Put this theory together, and what it kind of does is it uses Lyell's anisotropic synchrony convention, but actually details what the starting conditions, what the conditions would have needed to be like at creation for that to actually be realistic, and actually argue from the text as to why they think that this might be how God chose to create. So anyway, it's worth your consideration. I know one guy he's really into this stuff. He's an engineer, and he really liked that white hole cosmology view for a while until he got to looking a little bit deeper at the scriptures that the original guy who came up with it, Russ Humphreys, was using to base his ideas on it being that kind of a theory. And based on what he had come to learn about the scriptures, he was like, yeah, this is pretty doubtful. And I doubt it for the same reasons. So there are a number of different solutions. The two that you mentioned are definitely the ones, the appearance of age and the white hole cosmology were huge in the 90s, early 2000s. The research has moved on from them. However, it's still, there is no consensus. This is one of the issues in creationism in general, where there just is no consensus. So
should we move on to another question?
let's do it.
Spend the rest of the night in creationism.
No, let's move on.
Okay.
Well, that'll just get us ready for Steve's eventual devil's advocate segment.
Gosh.
So,
all right. So, who wants to give me a number? 1 in 50.
Steve, so are you going to be doing a devil's advocate on young Earth creationism?
Oh my gosh, I have not committed to that yet. Let the record show.
Okay.
Let me just say that I've been requested, like people have requested me to do debates, and I turned them down, and the reason is because I'm a lot more tentative than on a lot of the things I believe. And I don't know if maybe I should apologize for that. I don't know. But one guy wanted to debate me about the nature of Genesis 1. And I'm sitting here thinking yeah, I have thoughts, but I'm still learning. I'm not going to try to debate this position. Whereas one of us will emerge the victor and another one of us will not. It's I'm just, I'm tentative on a lot of this stuff. So I find it hard to be in those, devil's advocate even type positions. Anyway, so.
Yeah, that's friendly fire. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
How about number 4, Joel?
Number 4. Okay.
4 is kind of my lucky number.
All right. Does Jesus answer prayers? I don't know if there's a reason he mentioned Jesus more than God. Sometimes they do that.
Is it because of how Jesus would pray to himself?
Possibly. Let me. I'm going to breeze through it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be easy to tackle this simple question by merely listing a few scientific studies that fail to show prayer works.
Oh,
don't go down that road.
God is not. Christians don't conceive of God as like a magical genie or a vending machine where you just put in a prayer and out pops the answer. If God, God is not necessarily at our beck and call. So it's like you can't do a study on the efficacy of prayer because we just can't God is not obligated to answer a prayer, especially because Scripture even says that we're going to have to put God to the test. So if you're going to do some kind of study saying that God answers prayer, well, God is not obligated to answer prayer for the purpose of your study. So you shouldn't base your knowledge or your belief on God on those studies. But they have actually done studies which show that prayer actually does have benefits to a person's life. But again, just because it has benefits doesn't mean that it's true or that it actually works. So, you just can't base whether or not God answers prayer on the results of studies.
Well, and of course they have done, obviously these studies, and if you read the fine print on them, at least the ones that I've, been exposed to, you very quickly find out that it doesn't look like historic Orthodox Christianity, is what the people believe who were the subject of these studies, and probably for good reason, since we don't believe in the magical fairy God who is at our beck and call to appease our scientific, musings. So,
Right.
All right, let me read the first paragraph here because I think this really kind of cuts to the heart of his question. He says, suppose we could identify the most important and deserving prayer request of all and then measure its effectiveness objectively. Would that say something meaningful about the claim that God/Jesus answers prayer? I think so. Consider the prayer of a mother spoken aloud or in thought as she embraces her suffering and dying baby. I beg you, God, save my baby. Please, God, don't let her die. This is a prayer for a young child, easily the most innocent and worthy of rescue of anyone. It's about as sincere and unselfish as any prayer could be. I think this is a prayer that provides us with an ideal way to judge whether or not God answers prayers.
No, because nobody has any idea what the result will be of that. I can't believe I get to use this illustration so soon. Okay, so I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. the other night. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Bear with me, all right? All right. I'm 5, and let me take the tone down a little bit, okay? Because he just asked that's a very somber, like it's serious stuff. I get the sentiment behind what he's saying. The way that I would respond to that is because you are now placing yourself in the position of God to know that the best thing for that circumstance was not the way that it happened. And so the illustration, I'm 5 seasons now into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and there's a character. I'm going to ruin it for some people. If you're watching this and you haven't seen it yet, close your ears.
I've seen the whole show, so you're good with me.
Good. Okay. So there's a character in the show. Her name is Melinda May, and through the first few seasons, it's there's this recurring theme that she's called the Calvary. She's called the Calvary, and you get these little or the Cavalry. The Cavalry would be the right thing to say there. The Cavalry, there's kind of this, you kind of get the gist that it's about this thing that happened in Bahrain on a mission that she was on early into her time as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, but you don't really know that much of the details. And then eventually you do learn some more of those details. And the spoiler alert is that a lot of people were going to die if she did not kill a child who she had gone in to rescue all these agents. And this child had special powers, and the child was not backing down. And so she killed the child, and it had a tremendous effect on her life. She became a different person entirely. She became the Melinda May that you get to know during the show. And so fast forward to season 4, and they've got this really nerdy kind of theme going on where the agents are living in this, they call it the framework. It's this alternate reality where basically you're plugged into the matrix. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's the idea. You're sort of plugged into the matrix. And without going into a bunch of context, you find out basically the roles are totally reversed. And a lot of the people who you find in S.H.I.E.L.D. in the real world, in this framework world, they are in Hydra. And they even the producers even saw fit to make they did the logo differently at the beginning of the show. They introduced it as Agents of Hydra. It was really cool how they did that. And what you find out what you find out is that the entire reason, and in this reality, all of the good guys are working for the bad guys. They're allowed to basically torture and kill Inhumans. All the government, everybody's in on the whole thing against Inhumans, which are the special people who have powers, who aren't like regular humans, and they're able to take them out and everything. And the reason for this,
they're basically mutants without being X-Men.
Well,
essentially.
not exactly the same thing, because the X-Men were born mutants. The Inhumans are actually descended. I think they're descended from an alien race, the Kree or something like that.
As plot devices, they're the same thing.
Well, I mean, they're essentially the same thing. It's just their origin is different. Is the only thing. So.
Right. And so the reason why the world is the way it is, it's this disgusting world where people are being horribly mistreated and abused and everything. And you find out that the inciting reason for this having taken place is that there was a little Inhuman girl who murdered all of these people in a different city. I forget the name of the city, but absolutely took out and murdered and leveled this entire, like, basically city full of people. And then from then on, the entire world was against Inhumans. The trick is that in the framework, the evil person who set up the framework, what they did was take away the SHIELD agents who got trapped in there. They took away their greatest regret. And Melinda May's greatest regret was killing the girl. They took that away. She didn't kill the girl. The girl killed a bunch of people, and the entire world was in a 180 from the real world. And so I realized that we're talking about powered people in fiction, but that's the butterfly effect. I mean, it really is true that we're just in no position to know what good plans and what good outcomes that God could have in any given situation for making the particular decision. So the person who wants to use even that powerful, supposedly that powerful study, right, that powerful case, even the person who wanted to use that would have to be in such a position of omniscience to know that was the right thing or not the right thing to have been done in that situation. So that would just be my response to the abstract.
In fact, the example that you're using there on the show was sort of a classic trolley example, isn't it? Kill one person to save innumerable others.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was her greatest regret was killing the little girl. So she didn't kill the little girl in this world, and the little girl killed a bunch of other people, and then the whole world turned against their kind.
Oh, yeah. Joel, you're muted.
It seems to me that this question contains two specific questions here. And one is, why would God allow this small child to die? Is it just that God allows this small child to die? And the second is, would God answer a prayer to not let the child die? So, I mean, there's two ways to think about this. The first is, if the prayer had not been said, would it be okay for God to let this child to die? Would it be justified in the atheist mind that God allowed this child to die? And then if the prayer has been said, would that change the way that God would have acted otherwise? So one is a question about the justice of God or the problem of evil, that why would God allow children to die in the first place? And the other is the question of prayer, So in terms of prayer, the one thing that I like to look at is that, there's this idea that if God already knows what's happening in the future and knows what he's going to do, why say prayers at all? What effect does prayer have? And my response to that is, well, if God knows what happens in the future, he's aware of the prayer. He's just aware of the prayer ahead of time. If the prayer had not been said in the future, then he wouldn't be aware of it, because it's a counterfactual. It's a counterfactual. It is a thing that didn't happen. Therefore, he would not be aware of it because it never happened. So having said the prayer, regardless of when God becomes aware of the fact that you said this prayer, doesn't change the fact that the prayer was said. So I don't see this objection of God knows the future, so why pray, as being a strong one. God knows the future that happens. The prayer is part of that future. So there's that. And then second of all, as far as the death thing goes, everybody dies. Every single person dies at some place and some time through some method. And so once you're going to start questioning one kind of death at one point, then the question becomes, well, what would have been the ideal way for that person to die, under what circumstances, at what time? If God is not justified to allow this person to die at this period of time under these circumstances, at what point is God justified to allow this person to die? Are we okay with a person dying in old age, in a nursing home? I don't know, surrounded by loved ones. Which death is preferable? And I don't ever see atheists object to the fact of death, just the method and means of death. So, if 1,000 people die in a tornado, that's or a hurricane, let's say, that's a problem. But if one person out in the middle of the country gets struck by lightning and dies, not so much a problem. But every individual within that hurricane died through a weather event versus the guy in the middle of the country that died through a weather event. You were just suddenly calling it an atrocity because it happened to a lot of people at the same time. And so this guy, he says that this is a young child, it's an infant, so it's ultimately innocent. It's the type of thing that God ought to prevent. Now, ought God to prevent it without the prayer? Or is it only under the circumstance that this mother prayed that he thinks God ought to have prevented it? And then, again, this is returning to something I said before. Given God, what do we make of that circumstance? To me, what happens here is that the circumstance itself tells you something specific about God. I would say that probably under those circumstances, God probably does answer the prayer, in that he gives the mother peace over the event that's going to happen. Praying to God doesn't necessarily prevent bad things to happen, but it does give you the strength to endure the bad thing. And we can look at this in terms of, I've looked at this extensively myself in things like third world countries where, where a significant number of children don't survive to adulthood or even infancy. And there is a lot of various other kinds of things, disease, suffering, death, this kind of thing. These are the most religious societies. And it's the religion that allows them to endure this kind of suffering. They're able to get through because they have their religion to fall back upon. Sans religion, they may not even be able to, many of them may not be able to endure this kind of life. So, we know everybody's going to die. B, God allows us to endure the struggle and gives us the peace and strength to do so.
I'll just add one little note. I think y'all have covered just about everything without us getting too far off topic. But I'd be interested to ask the author if they would accept survey study as evidence, because I really have been thinking about it, and I don't think there's any kind of way we can devise a prayer experiment that would account for all the possible variables we'd even have to look at in an experimental sense. However, it would be very interesting to do a large-scale survey of not just Christians, but let's compare to other religions and find out how many people genuinely think they've experienced answered prayer in their life at some point. And, even categorizing that as, naturalistically explained answered prayer and supernaturally answered prayer. I think that would provide some very interesting evidence in terms of scale, even if it didn't provide the kind of proof here that the author may be looking for. But I think there would be some interesting evidence, if you will.
Yeah, I was thinking, Lee Strobel's got that book on miracles, and Here you go. This is interesting. This is something that that was part of his research. Of course, Lee Strobel is an apologist, a popularizer, but he's a good researcher. And so here's a quote from his book. Most of all, I wanted to know how many people have had an experience that they can only explain as being a miracle of God. Now, this is a little different, but I think it's related anyway. Right. So as it turns out, nearly 2 out of 5 U.S. adults, or 38%, said they have had such an experience, which means that an eye-popping 94,792,000 Americans are convinced that God has performed at least one miracle for them personally. So, and again, I think he's just kind of defending against the claim that most people don't think miracles happen or that prayer works, etc. And so that's maybe one such example of something like what you're talking about there, Caleb.
I have read studies that talk about, like, for instance, let's say there's a group of individuals that are undergoing some kind of severe chronic arthritis that is crippling. And, they would do a survey of the ones that are actively religious and praying and attending church and doing religious activities, and those that are not. And one finds that the ones who do regularly engage in prayer are much more stable and able to endure the chronic disability that they have, and to have a higher quality of life and life fulfillment than those who are not engaged in these religious activities, including prayer. And this goes back to what I was saying before, that perhaps the prayer doesn't involve, the answer to the prayer doesn't necessarily involve a miracle or a healing, but it does, and I can prove it scientifically through these studies, that it does make it much more endurable for the people who are going through the suffering.
All right. Well, I think we've about covered that one. So we are coming up on an hour and a half. So that leaves us like an hour and a half to go. But I'm going to give you guys the option before we kind of move on here to either we can go ahead and maybe do one more before we wrap up. We can wrap up right now, or we can do a round of the meme game.
Well, I'm okay with either one. I mean, I'm the West Coast guy, so I could go later. But of the three choices, I actually wouldn't mind a round of the meme game. But I'm okay if you guys want to tackle another question too.
Yeah, meme game.
Okay.
All right, give me just a second to get this going here. So, Steve, I will fill you in a little bit on the rules. We got into this last time for our first attempt at doing this game. So this one's a little bit different, and I've mixed it up a little bit this time to make it, I don't know, more interesting across the board. We'll see what people think of it. But the idea is that I will briefly show a meme up on the screen. I will describe it. And then after I do that, whoever's going first will have 30 seconds exactly to give
he's
a
strict on that 30 seconds too.
What was that?
I said, and he's strict on that 30 seconds too.
Yeah. So you'll have 30 seconds to give a response to the meme. And then the way we did it last time is we gave people a chance to rotate. So one person had it first one time, another had it first the next time. And so the person who went second had a little more time. This time, I think maybe we'll try this slight variation tonight. So we will do the first responder. I've got 6 here, so that'll give everybody a chance to start and do one twice. And then if anybody has a response they want to tack on after the first responder, raise your hand and I don't know. I'll give you each 2 additional responses. So, say round 1, Clinton goes first. He gives his 30-second response, and Steve wants to dive in and give a response. He throws up his hand. He goes right after Clinton and gives his response. So you get a little more advantage on your second responses. And we'll go from there. How's that sound?
Okay.
Sure. I learned while playing, so
Yeah. 30 seconds goes quick. So
I'm sure.
It does, especially when you're on the hot seat.
Wait a minute. One more question here. For purposes of this game, are questions arguments?
We play fast and loose with this. So
Okay,
whatever
okay,
you think would be a decent
right, cool.
response, whether it's a question, whether it's just calling out the
Okay.
logical fallacy, whatever seems a valid response to this meme. So the idea behind this, we kind of mentioned last time we did it, is one, just to say, hey, there are some quick kind of responses and things to consider with these. But 2 is to look at, anything you see in a short period of time and have very little time to respond to, and the way memes are designed to hit emotional chords and, humor, a quick response doesn't always do justice to the response something like this deserves. All right, you know what? We'll let Steve go third to give you guys a chance to show how it's done. And then we'll go from that. So Clinton and Joel, y'all want to rock, paper, scissors for it?
Sure, Rochambeau. Is this best of 3 or?
Nope, just one shot. That's it.
One and done. Okay. Oh, okay. So hold on. How are we gonna? So we'll have Caleb count it out. 1, 2, 3, and on 3 we give our
Okay.
decision or whatever you want to call it.
All right. 1, 2, 3, shoot.
Oh, I had scissors.
Scissors. All right, Clinton. You're going first.
Okay. It kind of seemed like Joel was hesitating a bit to Joel, you're muted.
He's got a slight delay there, so.
Yeah, because okay.
So I won then, huh?
Yeah, I suppose so. Although it looked like you were kind of waiting to see what I gave before you gave yours, but we'll let it go.
Well, you won with scissors, bro.
Yeah, that means I go first. Okay.
All right, here we
Excuse
go.
me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much, but yeah, lay it on me.
Yeah, it's real late for you out there on the West Coast, huh?
Yeah, it's 8:47. I mean, my brain shuts down at 10 p.m. So.
All right, so I am gonna describe the meme for any audio listeners, and then it will be time for you to go. So here is our first meme. This one has Jesus knocking on a door saying, "Let me in." Person inside says, "Why?" Jesus replies, "So I can save you." Person inside says, "From what?" And Jesus replies, "From what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in." Clinton, go.
Before my time starts, I just want to say I've seen this meme before, and I do find it. I mean, yeah, I find it funny in a dark humor sort of way. But anyway, go ahead and start my time.
All right, go.
So this is an obvious straw man of the Christian position that, the reason that people go to hell is the same reason that people go to jail. A judge it does not send you to jail for doing, or does not want to, save you for doing what, from, going to jail for doing what he's going to throw you in jail for doing. It's that everybody sins, and it's our sin that sends us to jail. And so Jesus is the savior, the one who can save us from sins, but he's not the one specifically sending us to hell.
All right, and I don't see any hands up, so we will prepare to move on. Joel,
Does that mean I won that meme then?
We'll see. We will have some. We need to have listeners, tally the points for us or something. There's just not a good scoring system for this game yet. So if anybody has any ideas, I'm open. But yeah, so we'll see at the end who feels like they won. Because feelings matter a lot more than facts, right?
Yeah, facts don't care about your feelings, or no, feelings don't care about your facts.
Yeah, so feelings
Right.
it is then. Whoever feels like they won at the end
There we go.
wins.
I identify as the winner of this game.
Too early for that, but
Okay.
at the end we can talk about it.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, so Joel, you are up next. Your meme.
Yep.
If your religion needs money to survive, your God is fake. And go.
Sure, I'd agree with that. Fortunately, my religion doesn't need money to survive. Here we go.
All right. Well, that was a solid 6 seconds. So Joel has gotten pretty good at these quick responses. So, yeah, 24 seconds to spare.
Man, that was good.
You know, I am going to do that. We're going to see who has the most time at the end.
So answer as quick as possible is the...
Well, not necessarily the single scoring factor, but
a factor.
yeah, at least one factor here. All right, 24 seconds there, Joel. All right. Well, you've seen how it's done, Steve. So, did anybody want to chime in on this one? Okay. Saving all those chime-ins. Okay.
Yeah.
I can expand on my answer just a bit.
You're using a chime-in for this, or?
Sure, why not? So, it shows an offering plate. So this is obviously a reference to a church that passes that around. Of course, churches are organizations. They're not the soul of religion. Religion is the ideal. They're a institution that one goes to in order to share their religion. Churches have buildings that need upkeep. They're nonprofit organizations. And so it's not the religion that requires the money to survive. It's that particular church. And the church has particular real world needs that are supplied by money. So if that church were to die, the religion would not. The objection here from the atheist, of course, is that religion is just a way of making money off of gullible people. But if you see the average church, then you'll see that church is not making a great deal of money.
Yeah, true.
All right. I think that was a good expansion. All right. Here we go. Steve, your turn. So this one's a little bit different. It's very visual, so it's hard to describe. But it says, when your dad tells you to come up with him up the mountain to make a sacrifice, but he doesn't bring a goat.
And,
All right, Steve.
You recognize Chuck E. Cheese, though, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so time, I guess.
Yep.
I mean, admittedly, it's kind of hard to parse. Like, I guess I would first ask, what's the specific objection that you are bringing up? I would say in the story, if you actually read the story and you read especially the elaboration of the story in the New Testament, you find that Abraham was a man of faith, and he brought his family up to be a man of faith. And so, what's the specific answer to this? I don't know. All I know is that Isaac was trusting in his father, and his father was trusting in God. All
right.
Yeah. This particular meme doesn't really seem to be making an argument so much as just a funny commentary on the Isaac and Abraham story.
Did I ever say this whole game was just going to be it making arguments?
No, you did not. That's a fair point.
We had Jesus
could easily be
a
Christian meme.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't give any categorizations like that, so we've got it mixed up a little bit.
I don't know if I have to use a chime in for this or whatever, but this would be a point of clarification. To elaborate on what I said, if somebody says something like this in jest, the first thing I'm going to ask is, can you make that into an argument for me? What are you arguing for? What are the premises and the conclusion that follows from the argument you're trying to make? So this is just pithy blathering without something like that.
Right, yeah.
No, that's a good point. I wouldn't really count that as kind of you giving a technical response to it. You're adding some thoughts. So
Yeah.
I should have told you guys it's free. Once we're done with the initial round and any responses, then you're free to add anything else on.
Okay.
We don't want to leave people hanging.
Right.
All right,
So-
back around to you, Clinton.
I'm up next.
Yep. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Ready,
I don't-
willing, and able.
All right. I don't remember which ones I put on here, so let's
So that'll be an adventure for all
see
of us.
this. Yeah. All right. So,
Okay.
okay. So this one,
okay,
I'll describe it real quick here.
I'll just
So this
say
has-
I am not a fan of Saiga 10 Bregan-Kate. I apologize for any presuppositionalists out there who hold him up as an icon of presuppositionalism.
So this one has William Lane Craig discussing with Lawrence Krauss, and Krauss asks, "Are you certain God exists?" Craig says, "No," and Krauss says, "Good." And then the second picture shows Saitin Bregan-Kate with a Bible saying, "Here, bro, you dropped this." All right, Clinton, go.
Okay, so this isn't really an atheist meme. This is a presuppositionalism meme. And so and it's also makes the mistake that presuppositionalists often make. Sorry, Tyler, in that Craig here is saying that epistemically, I don't have certainty that God exists because I could be a brain in a vat, I could be in the Matrix, but we can have we can have a lot of confidence that God exists, like 98% confidence because of the overwhelming evidence
Time's
for
up.
God's existence, but we can't have absolute certainty because of epistemology.
All right. Whoa, way. Hey, why do we have? How did this happen? This is
Oh, it looks like the one below Steve is an imposter because the Joel Furchess just came in.
I'm not gonna lie, that wigged me out a little bit. Like, oh. No, I mean, on this one, and Tyler and even me, there are some senses.
Wait a minute. Is this an official jump in here?
It was more conversational.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just checking.
No, it's all good. I was just gonna say, I think that, I know for a fact because I've seen him. Tyler would have just as much problem with this meme as anybody else would. I would too. There's a difference between, but interesting though, I have some atheist friends who are like, yeah, if you don't have absolute certainty about something, you don't know it. So this is a problem in even in some atheists and agnostics who, they generally believe that you have to be 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt certain, that before you can claim that you have any kind of knowledge. And I think that's obviously false.
Well, yeah, because you can't have that level of confidence in evolution, and yet they often act like they have that level of confidence in evolution.
Exactly. That's right. Mm-hmm.
But this really strikes me as more a meme for presuppositionalism than for atheism.
Yep. But he did say it was the meme game. I don't think he said it was the.
That's true.
Meme game.
You know what? I am probably reading in my own expectations into this game, so that's my fault, I suppose.
See, I'm trying to throw y'all for a loop with this every time so that there can be no expectations as to what this game actually is.
Listen, I used to be afraid of the tiny little Chucky doll. Now I'm going to be afraid of the big one when I'm going to see that question come up. There's a new Chucky in town.
Yep.
All right, Joel, are you ready?
Sure. I'll get closer to the screen of my phone here.
All right. So our next meme has a picture of Richard Dawkins. It says, invents the concept of memes, not quite what he had in mind. And go.
Not seen this one before.
All right. So the idea that Richard Dawkins came up with, he coined the term memes, and he was using memes as sort of the ideological equivalent of evolution. So memes, by his definition, would be like little, bits of, say, quotes that sort of transcend across cultures or between people, or maybe little ditties of song, just small pieces of information that tend to work themselves into the people. All right.
Okay, is that a true story? What have I been, where have I been?
Clinton, did you want to dive in with an official response here before we get into conversation?
Yeah, because this is the second to last one, right?
All right, go.
And I still have both of them. Oh, hold on, I'm still explaining my reasoning because there's only 2 left, and I have both of my jump-ins left. So I was going to jump in with this one here.
There you go. Fair enough. And go.
Okay, so this is a meme that I had not seen before. I think it's delightful. My favorite memes are the ones that make actual jokes geared toward making you laugh and not trying to make an argument or deride or insult anyone for their beliefs. So yeah, obviously Richard Dawkins is an excellent biologist who's done real work in that field. But the concept of memes on the internet works similarly to Dawkins' concept of memes in biology. But they also make for really bad arguments. And so if you really want to have good reasons for your belief, you need to study and not just read memes.
Can somebody explain this to me? Can we quit the formalities here real quick and tell me what the crap Richard Dawkins has to do with memes? What am I missing?
May I?
Dive in, Joel.
Yeah.
Okay, so he coined the term memes. Before memes were funny things on the internet, it was a concept that Richard Dawkins had come up with, and I was trying to give a bare bones minimum idea of what that concept was. You see, Dawkins had to struggle with this idea that somehow, biology doesn't necessarily explain the advancement of human thought, of culture, of the development of philosophy, and how we have evolved, if you will, mentally or formally in our ideas, how we become more sophisticated over time, and how cultures develop and so forth. And so, because biology in the biological sense, evolution in the biological sense, couldn't explain those things, he came up with another idea of evolution in the ideological sense, which involved memes. And memes, as I was trying to explain, are just small bits of information that get kind of transferred between cultures and between your ideas. So whenever you start humming or whistling "shave and a haircut," that's a meme, because shave and a haircut has kind of worked its way into the human consciousness across cultures and history, such that it's just become something that's worked its way in. And he would compare memes to things like mutations. So in and of themselves, these little bits of information, and you could put sayings like "knock on wood," that would be a meme. These little bits of information kind of build up and they attach to each other, and they cause the development of thought, philosophy, and culture.
So this is really interesting. Am I exposing my cards here? Like, is there like a really popular book that he talks about this in that I should have read as a Christian apologist and have not read? Why does everybody except me know this?
I would imagine The Selfish Gene is probably the book you'd want to read for this concept. Is that correct?
Okay.
I honestly only know of it from lectures he's given. I don't know which book he's put it in.
Interesting.
Okay.
Well, that's really interesting. It's an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah, so
cool.
so Richard Dawkins is the one that we can credit with the with creating not ancient, but I guess a primitive concept of memes that we know today as these funny images that everyone shares around.
So he truly is single-handedly responsible for the destruction of society as we know it. Good to know.
Right.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, the term meme has become a meme because it was something he came up with, but it attached to this very specific internet phenomena,
right.
Which wasn't its original meaning.
Interesting.
And that's exactly what a meme does. It builds on each other and it attaches to things that it wasn't originally intended to. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
There we go. History lesson on memes.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. We are down to our final response here. Steve is up. So here we go. This one has a picture of Ken Ham, but he's in the
Did you do this on purpose, Caleb?
Ancient Aliens guy. He says, "I'm not saying evolution is a salvation issue, but it is a salvation issue." Go.
So this is a common complaint from those who don't take a young age creationist position. Basically, Ken Ham says that evolution is not a salvation issue, but then he speaks as if it is. The point is that there are things that salvation depends upon that may be potentially compromised if evolution is true. That's his point, whether or not you agree with it.
Ooh, nice job. 5 seconds to spare.
Okay, so I'll do my second add-on.
All right, go.
Well, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I'm just doing this because I'm a little OCD about certain things, and I want to use both of my points. But yeah, so evolution, obviously, I would disagree with Ken Ham. It's not a salvation issue because just because you take one portion of Scripture as allegory, such as Genesis 1 and 2, doesn't mean you're then committed to taking the entire Bible as allegory. So you can still attain salvation by following the teachings of Jesus, even if you take Genesis 1 and 2 to be allegorical.
Yeah, I think I have two official chime-ins, so I may need to use them both here.
All right, Steve's full minute of time. Go.
Okay. So the problem here is that. So I both agree and disagree with this whole thing, this whole position. All right. Like the point is that if there are potentially things that, yes, it is true that like you've got some portions of Scripture you could take as allegory and it would not necessarily affect the truthfulness of other portions of Scripture. Yeah, that's 100% true. It's definitely the case that I have met young age creationists who truly do believe that evolution is a salvation issue. The vast majority of them do not believe it is a salvation issue. But what the point is that if there are things about the faith, which again, depending on how long you have to argue for it, you may be able to root out some things that would lead to the undermining of a Christian position on the world. And if you take the Bible as authoritative and you
time.
Yeah. That's what it has to do with. So anyway.
All right. I see you're not chiming in, Joel. You're just gonna take your extra 30 seconds.
No, I don't need to chime in.
All right. Well, any discussion you want to add here? I know you didn't exactly get to finish up everything there, Steve. So if you want to open it to discussion now, that's fine.
I mean, I don't know. We'll just kind of button it up. We spent a long time on evolution tonight, but it's just, yeah. And I had a really good response planned out for my minute, and then you said go, and I totally lost it. So, but I do agree. I think that. That people with the platform that Ken Ham has and those who follow him, I think they should be way more clear about this than they are. I mean, because most certainly you do seem to get, and that's why this meme exists, right? You do seem to get this conflicting message. It needs to just be kind of once and for all said that no, like there's just no logical gap that you can make to say, therefore, like Joel says, like evolution is true, therefore salvation is impossible, or therefore you believe in evolution, therefore you are not saved. You can't make that logical leap no matter how much you try to spin it. I know what I was going to say. Okay, answers in Genesis, something you have to understand about them, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong here, is that there's a huge emphasis on the idea of worldview. Worldview is the game. It's the name of the game. And so what Ken Ham and company argue, and I think in some cases they're right, in some cases they're off, in some cases they're just wrong. But what they in general try to argue is that there are certain aspects of worldview that have implications for other aspects of worldview. And if you take certain points of the evolutionary worldview and press them to their logical conclusion, you can't arrive consistently at the issue of at the truthfulness of Christianity. Again, there are cases in which they say this and I agree, in cases which I don't. But regardless, what they would say is, yes, a person can be saved and believe in evolution. What they would say is what's in question is whether they could do so consistently. So so anyway, I both agree and disagree with the spirit of the meme. I think that, you know, this is one of those situations where it requires a little bit more conversation than just what you can get out of a, you know, out of a meme. But I appreciate the spirit of it. They need to be more clear, you know.
Yeah, you know, this is actually a good Photoshop job. I'm looking at Ken Ham, and
Right?
if I didn't know that it's based on a picture of the History Channel guy, I wouldn't even know that was a Photoshop. To be honest.
Yeah.
George Tsoukalos is his name.
What's that?
George Tsoukalos is his name.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my dad actually watches the History Channel, so I occasionally, see it when he has it on, and that guy's on there talking away.
I
That was
guess
fun.
I will jump in on this one a little bit since I've got to jump in left.
right.
You know, there is a lot of instances in the Bible where the concept of the Christian God is introduced to a new culture that doesn't have the kind of background that you and I would have with the entirety of Scripture stretched out in front of us. Tyler, his argument about Genesis is that it was an attempt to sort of re-educate the Hebrew people into the idea of a monotheistic God. And so they took a lot of the ancient Near Middle East creation motifs and then reworked them to have a monotheistic God at the center, therefore replacing sort of the warring gods and so forth of that time. And then it became a temple text in the way that he constructed the universe was the way that a temple would be constructed. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it makes the point that here is a people, and this is true regardless of which position you adopt on the literality of the Genesis story, that yes, indeed, Moses was going out into the wilderness with a group of people that did not have the scripture. And they may have been descendants of Abraham, but we don't really know how much of that survived in their culture. They were coming out of a land that was polytheistic and, heathen in the kind of things that they, pagan in the kinds of things that they worshipped and so forth. And so as Moses is traveling and as he's creating the Pentateuch and so forth, he is in fact re-educating a group of people into monotheism and the God of their forefathers. And so, and you see that a bit in, say, the Ten Commandments. It says, no other gods before me. It's not denying that there are other gods. It's, first and foremost saying, put me first. And then it builds into, the second commandment kind of addresses that point, saying, you don't worship other things, graven images, things on the earth, things in the sky, and it puts God as transcendent above the universe. So there's that. And then in the New Testament, you have them going into these Grecian cultures and these pagan cultures. And you see Moses doing this, where he goes in and he identifies one one pedestal in a very idolatrous culture that says to the unknown God. And then he uses this as a foothold of bringing them in. In any case, they do not preach six-day creationism, then Christ. They could preach Christ, and as the person accepts Christ, they bring a lot of baggage in with them from their culture and their background of learning, and that baggage has to be addressed on the way. But nobody is going to say that if I were to go on an airplane and minister to a Muslim and have the Muslim fall on their knee and accept Christ, that suddenly all of their Muslim baggage is going to disappear, or that it needs to disappear for them to be saved at that moment.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And as a matter of fact, frankly, Ken Ham would agree with you. Where the grievance lies is a lot of Christians, and understandably, get offended because so much of what they write throws around the word compromise. And from day one, I've said we've got to stop using that word. I've said creationists have to stop using the word compromiser. and young age creationists, and then old age creationists, and whatever other variants, evolutionists, whatever, need to stop using the word pseudoscientist. If people who haven't read the science would stop calling them pseudoscientists, and people who haven't read the people would stop calling the people compromisers, we would actually be able to have civil discussion around this whole thing. And that's been my position from day one. And so people don't like to be called compromisers, and that's the reason for the meme. People get offended by that. But certainly, Ken Ham is under no delusions that somebody has to affirm six-day creationism before they're able to affirm, the truths of the great things of the gospel, the truths of Christianity. That's just ridiculous. And I'm kind of like you. We talked about this a few minutes ago, but Caleb, I'm kind of like you. I advise people to totally avoid it. Just avoid it. Just get out of it. It is not. It's the kind of thing that you can. Has anybody here watched Apollo 13? We're on. We're on number 16. You're talking about number 872. Like that's way down the list of. It is important, but it's certainly not. We preach Christ. That's the deal.
Yeah, Apollo 13 is one of the greatest space movies ever made.
It's one of the greatest movies ever made, in my humble and entirely accurate opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
All right. So to provide a final recap of the game, and I figured out how we'll do scoring, so we may never get a score, but just to recap, Joel had 24 seconds he saved, and Steve had 5 seconds he saved throughout the game. So the scoring is up to the listeners. So go put a comment in chat with who you think won. And if we ever get enough comments to determine a winner, then we will announce that on a future meme game. So
yeah, or comment on the video. We receive those comments and we interact with them. So
yeah,
you don't have to be listening live to participate.
Absolutely not. Yeah, comment on the video. We'll determine the winner in 6 months to a year from now. So, I think that about wraps it up. Time to let everybody give a real brief pitch. A 30-second time limit on the meme game should have helped prepare you for this. So here's your chance to give a brief pitch of where people can find content. For me, in addition to here, you can check out Question Christianity over on Facebook or YouTube. And then while you're here on the Mentionable page, go ahead, hit notifications, hit subscribe. Better than any of that, leave us a comment. Have a conversation with us. That's the kind of thing we love. All right, Joel.
All right, so I've begun posting about my research on my personal website, which is joelfurchess.com. If you go there and then follow the link about the research that I do, you'll see some of the posting that I've made. Again, most of my involvement is the Mentionables, so you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter at the Mentionables. I'm sorry, Mentionables1. Our website is thementionables.org. The there is very important.
More important than you know.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Clinton.
Okay, well, you can find me on Facebook. Just search my name. You can find me on Twitter, Clinton_Wilcox. You can find me on MeWe and Parler. Pro-Life Philosophy is my Parler handle. And you can also find my articles on the Secular Pro-Life blog, blog.secularprolife.org, or the Life Training Institute blog at prolifetraining.com. You can find the blog there. And I also host a podcast called Pro-Life Thinking. I have a page for Pro-Life Thinking on Facebook and MeWe, and you can find our audio-only podcast on iTunes or blogtalkradio.com/Pro-Life Thinking, or you can find us on YouTube where we do videos. And the purpose of Pro-Life Thinking is to train you to defend the pro-life position effectively and persuasively. And so if you're interested in getting as much out of the podcast and out of the training as possible, it would benefit you to listen to the audio-only podcast and also watch our videos on YouTube, because we do have unique content on both platforms.
All right. And Steve, tell people where they can find you.
Sure. So two main places. If you go to BibleNerdPodcast.com, that will take you to a special place on my site where it has the different places where you can subscribe. And what we're doing on there, I call it Eating the Bible, expositional apologetics and theology. So, hopefully you go to a church where they're doing, expositional preaching and teaching of some sort, going, verse by verse, if that's your style, through the scriptures. And so we're doing that on the podcast, but with a special bent toward apologetics issues that come up in the text and theological issues. So we're taking our time, going real slow through the book of John right now. And it's really cool because you discover how the Bible is speaking to things of philosophy, and you discover how literate the writers were of the day and the ideas that they were interacting with. Again, just trying to get people to fall in love with the Bible. And more to that end as well, I actually just today launched a little community on Substack, which is it's basically a paid newsletter service. You can do free or paid. And I have decided to open up a little paid thing there to kind of get a more intimate community going with people. And that's at BibleNerdSociety.com. And you can get some content there that is that you can't get anywhere else. And some of the different audiobooks and books and other digital resources that I've created, you get everything there. Right now, if you get it before the year runs out through the end of December, it's only $2.50 a month. $2.50 a month, or $15 for the entire year. And that's your lifetime rate. So BibleNerdPodcast.com for all the free stuff, and BibleNerdSociety.com if you want just a little bit more.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to roll these credits, but we hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope to see you back here again. We'll look forward to reading comments and hearing from you guys for what you thought of the show.